When a family member dies, it breaks our hearts. But how do we cope when two young cousins turn up dead in the BACKDAM? Today, we will be looking at the deaths of Isaiah Henry and Joel Henry, two young black cousins with bright futures ahead of them that turned up brutally murdered in West Coast Berbice. On the morning of Saturday, September the 5th, 2020, 19-year-old Joel Henry woke up and told his mother, Gail Johnson, that he would be going to the BACKDAM with his 16-year-old cousin, Isaiah Henry, to pick coconuts. Now, this was a normal thing, so nobody had any questions. But this was Joel's second time actually going to the BACKDAM, so he was really excited to go. He also told his mother that he'd be working night shift that night because, the money was small, so he wanted to get a little bit extra pay overtime. But his mother really didn't like this idea. She never liked the idea of him working overnight, but she knew that it was something he was doing to help support her and his 7 siblings, because she was a single parent who would sell chips at the Berbice Bridge along with crabs to get money to look after the family. So he and his cousin left. They didn't even have breakfast because they didn't think they would be gone for so long. But that was the last time that they were ever seen by any of their family members alive. So nighttime came and Gail knew that he said he would be working overnight. So, she didn't ask any questions when he didn't come, but something on her heart, something just wasn't sitting right. So she actually stayed up that entire night because she just wasn't feeling like everything was okay. In Guyana, when you're 16, you don't usually just sleep out without asking permission. You gotta get permission from your parent. So that morning, Isaiah's mother came over to Miss Johnson, which is Joel's mother, to ask if Joel actually came home that night. When she said no, that was the moment they knew that something had happened to their boys. But they could never guess the heartache that was about to come. So let's rewind a bit to Friday, September the 4th. And let's go to the home of Isaiah Henry, the 16-year-old. So that evening, he had told his father that the next morning, which would be the Saturday, he would be going with his cousin Joel to pick coconuts in the BACKDAM. Now, his father, Gladstone Henry, actually knew that there was a specific spot where they would go to pick these coconuts and these mangoes. But on this occasion, he really didn't know where they were going. So now we're back to Saturday. So on the afternoon of Saturday the 5th, when Mr. Gladstone returned home from work, his wife had informed him that, Isaiah didn't come back home from going to pick coconuts in the morning. So the father said, okay, I'm going to go and look for him. So he went and he was searching. He went to the area where he knew that the boys would usually go to pick coconuts. And they found some unpeeled coconuts. And he also found a makeshift tool that his son would actually use to peel coconuts. But there was no sign of his son. He kept looking. He got some more persons to help, but they could not find these boys. So now we're back to Sunday, September the 6th. And now that both mothers know that neither boys had returned home from picking mangoes, Mr. Henry continues to search for his son and his nephew. So because this is a village, everybody knows everybody. So they get persons from the village to help search for these two boys. But what they would come upon was an horrific sight. Late afternoon, Sunday, Mr. Henry was the one that found his nephew first. And a little off, he found the body of his son. We will get into how they sustained their injuries later on in this story. But when the coroner did the autopsy, he found that these young boys had died from hemorrhaging and shock due to the injuries that they had incurred. So because of the brutality of the murders, there were riots throughout Guyana. So this caused a delay in police investigations because the members of Number 3 Village, the area where the boys were from, were so angry that they blocked the roads, they were burning tires, and then there were some that were just taking advantage of the situation and robbing persons who had nothing to do with these crimes. And the worst thing that escalated this situation was a revenge killing. Let's skip ahead a bit. The day after the bodies of the Henry boys were found, the police started to take persons into custody. Now, public perception is a scary and dangerous thing. When the villagers saw who these suspects were, they had automatically said that they were guilty. And then it started to be a racial thing. Haresh Singh was a 17-year-old boy, and many of his relatives were arrested and taken into custody by the police. They were questioned and then they were subsequently released. But because they were even picked up in the first place, persons assumed that they were guilty. Now, 3 days after the discovery of the Henry boys, Haresh's body was found battered and his bike burnt in the number 3 BACKDAM. What could have caused this? In June of this year, 4 men were charged in the murder of Haresh Singh. 27-year-old Gladstone soldierman Henry, this is Isaiah's brother. 21-year-old Charles Bucko Scott. 27-year-old Joel Bolo Gittins. And 29-year-old Philip Ratman Anderson. Philip Anderson was the one who went to police and told them everything that happened with Haresh's death. So according to family, Haresh was actually sent to deliver water to another family member. So let's hear Anderson's account of what actually happened. According to Anderson, Gladstone, Isaiah's brother, came to him after the bodies of the Henry boys were found and after Haresh's family was picked up by the police, and told him that Haresh's family was responsible for the death of Isaiah and Joel and that they got to die as a form of revenge. According to Anderson, Gladstone asked him to follow him to the road. So they left and they went walking to the road and they met up with Bucko and Bolo. And while they were making their ways to the road, they armed themselves with pieces of wood and they went straight to Haresh's family's residence. Now when they got there, they started to verbally abuse the family and state that they would have to die for killing their brother and cousin. After confronting the family, they actually left and went back to Isaiah's residence. And after being there for a while, they left and went to number 3 BACKDAM. They crossed a bridge and went to the other side. And when they got there, they saw Haresh on a bike approaching them. So at this point, remember, it's now going to be 17-year-old Haresh, a teenager, against 4 adult men. So when they actually met up with Haresh, they told him to stop. And he did. But he refused to come off his bike. And this made Bolo very angry. And according to Anderson, Bolo pulled Haresh off of his bike and bent him over. And this is when Gladstone, Isaiah's brother, took the wood and hit Haresh in his head. So Haresh fell to the floor and was groaning and rolling in pain. Bolo was so angry that he took the piece of wood from Gladstone and continuously hit Haresh in his head. Now when Anderson saw this, he said that this was the moment he was like, nah, he didn't want a part of this, and he left. And it was later that he heard that Haresh died and that they burnt the bike. And I guess that's when he started to feel guilty after a while and he went to the police. So now we know that Haresh died because the Henry's family thought that Haresh's family was responsible for their death. Now we have 3 dead teenage boys. Now let's go back to the search for the killer of the Henry boys because we still don't know who killed them. So while the police were investigating, they found that the boys were actually killed somewhere else and their bodies were actually taken to the spot where they were found. After months, 3 persons were taken into custody and charged with the murder of Joel Henry and Isaiah Henry. And these 3 persons are, and I'm going to read their names so I get it right, 20-year-old Akash Monkey Singh, his stepbrother 30-year-old Vinud Maga Gopal, and 34-year-old Anil Danpal Sanchara. Throughout the court proceedings and since they have been arrested, Vinud and Anil have always claimed that they're innocent and that their names are being called wrongfully. But Akash was the one that actually confessed and implicated those 2 in the crimes. So according to Akash, in August of 2020, the trio had set up a cannabis farm in the backlands of West Coast Berbice. When they had returned in September, they found that their farms had been destroyed and trampled. And when they had actually inquired about who was going to the back there, persons told them that there were 2 young boys who would actually go to the backlands and destroy the farms. So after some time, Joel and Isaiah ventured into the area and the trio asked them if they knew anything about cannabis farms being destroyed. Now, these 2 young men, 16 and 19, now they thought it was a joke, so they laughed. So because they laughed, Vinud assumed that these were the 2 young men that they heard about that were destroying their farms. And he picked up a cutlass and he struck one of the Henry cousins in the neck. Anil took up his cutlass and followed him and struck the other cousin in the neck also. So they continue to deal blows to these young men. Akash alleges that he only joined in because he was threatened by Vinod that if he didn't join, that they would kill him too. And he said that the part he played was he did the markings on the boys' bodies. Now, if you want to hear anything about these markings, you can just go and do your own research. I'm gonna put some links below. I just don't want to go into describing in details what happened. After killing these two young boys, Akash claims that they moved their bodies from where they actually did the killing to another part of the BACKDAM, the area that they were actually discovered. Vinod and Anil continue to profess their innocence, but as of right now, they're the three that will actually be charged with the murder of Joel and Isaiah Henry, and in the eyes of the law, the case is closed. But there are a lot of persons who speculate that these two young men, well, actually the two that are actually professing their innocence, are being framed, and while the real killers are walking free. I don't know. The only people that actually know what happened to these Henry boys are Joel, Isaiah, the killers, and God. I don't know, and I cannot speculate. A total of 3 young boys, 16, 17, and 19, were killed senselessly. They had their entire futures ahead of them. It has been 1 year since they've been taken from their family, and their deaths brought more racial divide to a country that is already divided. Let's not focus on fighting each other. Let's focus on trying to keep each other safe. We should all be our brother's keeper. And one thing that we can learn from these 3 young, vibrant teens is that an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.